How do we build a service that brings in thousands and thousands of people to Christ if you're in a large church, or hundreds of people to Christ if you're in a smaller church over the lifetime of your church? Here's how you do it. These are only general guidelines. They're not the 10 Commandments. You're going to figure out the specifics that work best to reach unbelievers in your area. But we put a lot of prayer into this. And we put a lot of study into this. And we certainly had 36 years of trial and error to discover what works. But as a result, tens of thousands of people have come to Christ in this church. So how do you do it? Let's start. Number one, plan it, the worship service for unbelievers, plan it with your target in mind. So every week, you're going to ask about whatever service you choose, Sunday morning or whatever, who are we trying to reach? That's the fundamental question. Who are we trying to reach? That goes back to, what are we fishing for? Know what you're fishing for. Learn to think like a fish. We've covered all those principles already. And you're going to define your style. Are we going after people who want formal or informal? Are we going after people who want contemporary or traditional? Are we going after high energy or low energy? Who's our target? We started with that. Remember, you can't aim at 4 different targets. You got to pick a target and say, that's the kind of style we're going to be. That's the kind of direction we're going after, those kind of unbelievers. Now, our church has targeted unchurched Southern Californians, pretty much between about 25 and about 50 or 55. And how your music will determine that, but you got to speak in words they understand. You got to use music they understand, but you got to start with your target in mind. Number 2, make it as easy as possible to attend your church. Make it as easy as possible. You constantly have to be on the lookout for what are the hassle factors we need to remove. And you continually ask, how can we make attending worship more convenient? How can we minimize the hassle factor? Chrysler Corporation once did a study, and they discovered that the number one thing that Americans will not put up with is inconvenience. And yet, particularly as your church grows, it can often even become more and more inconvenient. You know, we have an inconvenient factor that in this church, you might have to park down on the Mickey, Dumbo, Daffy Duck parking lot to get up here. It might take you 20 minutes to get into the service, to get your children checked in. That's a hassle factor. How do you minimize that? In a smaller church, you drive up, walk in, and in 5 minutes, kids are in their classes. There are factors at every stage of your growth that you're going to have to deal with. Let me give you some suggestions to minimize the hassle factors. Number 1, offer multiple services. Offer multiple services. Every time you start another service, you put another hook in the water. If you will look at the churches that grew the fastest or grew the most this last year, I guarantee you, they all started new services. Every time you do that, every time you start a service, you throw another hook in the water. We were in 6 services here at Lake Forest for literally a decade or more, and then we started doing the multi-sites, which on a weekend now, we offer, 40 different services. There are 40 different times to come to Saddleback Church. That's a lot of hooks in the water. Offer multiple services. Number 2, offer surplus parking. In America, not in every country, but in America, it takes parking to reach people. Every time pastors tell me, they say, hey, we got a church building, we just built, I said, how many seats you got? Great, fantastic. What I'm more interested in, I'm not interested in how many seats you've got in your church. I'm interested in how many parking spots you've got. Because what we've discovered, that in America, when people come to church, they like to bring their car. And if you don't have a space for their car, the space for their rear is worthless. And if you have multiple services, you have to have surplus parking because people are arriving before the other people have left their parking spot. Does that make sense? So if you say, well, we got a parking spot for every seat. Sorry, that's not enough. If you have multiple services because people are coming in to park while the others have not left yet. So you have to have surplus parking. In 1981, I asked pastors all over America of the largest churches, what's the biggest mistake you made? Every single one of them said, not enough parking. If you don't have space for the car, you don't have space for the person. You want to know the value of a parking spot at your church? Here's what you do. Take the number of spaces that you currently have and divide it into your annual giving. And then you're going to get the amount that each one of those parking spots is worth. Most pastors have no understanding how realize parking is far more important than the number of seats in your service, in your worship center. That's a hassle factor. If they can't park, they can't come. A third thing, offer children's classes at the same time as your service. The unchurched don't want their kids squirming in service, and not many unbelievers are going to give an hour of their time. Many of us grew up in churches where you went an hour to Sunday school and then you went an hour to worship. That isn't happening today in most places, and certainly with an unbeliever. If you don't have a Sunday school class for your children while you're having worship, adult worship, they may not stay. Another thing, put a map on all advertisements. Now, you know, the street, I don't know if you've noticed when you came in here, our street is called Saddleback Parkway. We actually got the road named after our church, Saddleback Parkway. And then the other entrance over here is called Purpose Drive, little play on words there. But we're the only thing on Saddleback Parkway. The address of this church is number 1 Saddleback Parkway. And yet people still get lost. How is that possible? How is that? You got to put a map on everything you do. That is a hassle factor. Okay, number 3, important thing. Improve the pace and flow of your services. Improve the pace and the flow of your services. In the service for unbelievers, let me give you some suggestions. I wrote them down there. Speed it up. Increase the pace of your service. You know, television has permanently shortened the attention span. Everybody agree with that? And video games have shortened it even more, the attention span. You know, TV commercials are 30 seconds or less, and that's about the attention span of the average person. In fact, 10 seconds. Sometimes, have you noticed when they take a football game, a timeout, all the stuff they throw at you during a timeout? You got 3 ads, 2 promotions, and a commentary from whoever's commenting on the game. In a timeout, as if you're going to get bored during a timeout. And they just throw things at you, boom, 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 boom. In contrast, when you come to worship, a lot of worship services move at a snail's pace. The song leader gets up and leads the song very slowly. And then the announcement, once he sits down, the deacon over here thinks about getting up and walking over to give the announcements. And he just drones on and on and on and on. And then he walks over and he sits down. And then the pastor thinks about getting up. And Dr. Death comes over to the pulpit and begins to talk low and slow. And we're so glad you're... And the unbeliever's already checked out. It's a boom, 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 boom. Today, America has spiritual ADD, attention deficit. Now, you set the tempo of your service in the first 5 minutes. And the tempo that you're going to have at start will be the tempo that you carry through. You got to capture people's attention, boom, right off the bat. Ba-da-da-da-da-da. You know, it's a kind of a, whoa, wake up, America. So speed it up. Another way, look for ways to save time in your service. Make every minute count. When I started Saddleback, before we did the first service, we actually did a dress rehearsal service the week before Easter, and I literally took a stopwatch and I timed every element. Okay, we could cut that, we could spread that out, we can shorten that, we can do this. And we just looked for ways to save time. And for many years, Glenn did this on every Saturday night service so that we could look. And we even today, after service, we look at the timesheet on the first of all the services we're doing, going, okay, cut that, change that, do that. We're always looking out. You know, if you just double up your ushers, you cut your offering time in half. You can take it 100% faster. Just have twice as many ushers. So you're saving time there. Another thing is minimize transition time. Make the service flow. A lot of churches, there's too much dead time. Segues between the element of the service, between the speaker and the music, and the music and the speaker. The difference between a good service and a great service is flow. It's flow. Now, we use a little thing called IMPACT, I-M-P-A-C-T. Inspire, movement, praise, adoration, commitment, and tie it together. I'll explain that a little bit together. But we have a flow that we look at in minimizing transition times. Number 4, keep your pastoral prayers understandable and probably shorter than you normally would. In other words, if you got a service for unbeliever, it's not the time to pray for Brother Bob's hernia and Sister Bertha's toenail. Those kind of things can be prayed for later. The unchurched can't handle long lists of prayer needs, things like that. And pastor, by the way, please don't use the pastoral prayer to catch up on your quiet time. Do your long prayers at home, and then if you haven't really prayed, you haven't really prayed about this service, well, don't use the pastoral prayer to pray about your sermon. You just get to the point.